Hi, listeners. Welcome to the 100th episode of Cell and Gene, the podcast. We've dedicated this podcast to celebrating the visionaries and risk takers who are shaping the future of cell and gene therapy, the leaders who take big swings in order to make a real difference in patients' lives. And so, in just a minute, you will understand why I invited Audrey Greenberg, a patient-centric, trailblazing executive with a track record of launching, scaling, and successfully exiting multi-billion-dollar ventures, to be my guest for this milestone episode. As the founder and chief business officer of the Center for Breakthrough Medicines, Audrey built the company from the ground up into a leading cell and gene therapy CDMO, securing $500 million in capital and leading its acquisition by SK Pharmteco. She's been recognized as a Titan 100 Hall of Famer, most influential Philadelphian, and a medicine maker powerlifter. Now she's founder and CEO of AG Capital Advisors, where she leverages her expertise in private equity, M&A, and operational transformation to advise high-growth companies across the life sciences sector. Listeners, Audrey's CV is remarkable. There's no question. And here's the best part. You walk away from conversations with Audrey so much smarter on the topic. And it was a delightful experience because she's just so easy to talk to. In this episode, she reveals why the best technology doesn't always win and how companies that fail to define a clear business model and commercialization path often burn through cash too quickly. We explore the rise of alternative investors, the need for capital efficient strategies, and what small cell and gene therapy companies can do to attract funding in a risk averse market, and so much more. Whether you're a biotech entrepreneur, investor, or industry leader, this episode is for you because you'll hear how to navigate the evolving biotech landscape, secure funding, and bring transformative therapies to market. So whether you've listened to all 100 episodes or just a few here and there, we appreciate your support and enthusiasm for advancing cell and gene therapy. And we're excited for what's ahead and look forward to bringing you even more insightful conversations in the future. So let's start now with my conversation with Audrey Greenberg. Enjoy. Audrey Greenberg, welcome to Cell and Gene, the podcast, the 100th episode of Cell and Gene, the podcast. I'm so happy you're here.
So great to be here. 100th episode. That's amazing.
I know. I'm really, really excited about it. And everything I covered in the intro is the reason why I invited you to be my guest for this milestone episode. So really, in addition to your impressive and extensive CV and certainly well-deserved awards and accolades, and having worked, right alongside with some of the sector's MVPs in both science and business, your patient advocacy efforts are what really is most inspiring to me and certainly our listeners. And that you're just one of the most down-to-earth, approachable executives I've had the pleasure of working with. So, kind of you have that vibe of wherever you are is where you want to be, which I don't think is necessarily taught. And you're a fellow transplant to the greater Philadelphia area like me. So
Philly. Thank you. That was all very nice.
Yeah. So thank you for your time and for your time with me and my listeners. So,
and by the way, I feel the same way about you. I always love talking to you and seeing you at the conferences and around Philadelphia.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So, all right. So we know you co-founded the Center of Breakthrough Medicines and you transformed it into a premier cell and gene therapy CDMO with $500 million in capital and, this 350,000 square foot GMP facility before its acquisition by SK Pharmteco. But now you're the head of AG Capital Advisors. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah, I started a consulting firm that works with institutional investors on asset selection, operational transformation, and of course, the most important, as we know in cell and gene, commercial excellence. So we focus on really turning, I would call investment potential into real scalable success. We all know the biotech industry has an executive and execution gap to some extent. Many companies have strong science, but fail to scale because they lack either funding discipline, operational strategy, and or commercial focus. So our services really included AG capital advisors. One, strategic asset selection. So for a private equity firm that's looking to figure out where to deploy their capital, identifying and evaluating high potential biotech and pharma services. Pharma services is really my sweet spot investments. Second, as I said, operational transformation, making portfolio companies leaner, more efficient, and scalable. Third, and has been a hot topic with Bluebird and everything else, commercial strategy, really shifting from an R&D focus to revenue focus, which includes payer reimbursement and access points with cell and gene. It's about where patients are being treated and the like. And then fourth, private equity advisory, helping private equity firms with diligence acquisition strategies. And then what a lot of folks have been focused on right now is post-acquisition growth. There were a lot of investments made in 21 and 22, or just prior to the crash, I guess we call it, and are having a hard time scaling those organizations to hit their original pro forma projections. And that's where I step in to help them execute.
Oh,
it's a mouthful.
they're with the best of the best. So that's great. And everything you just described, we're, more or less going to kind of get through our discussion here. But,
Okay.
We know you've been deeply involved in building and scaling ventures and pharma services companies. And, to start us off, what would you say is the most surprising lesson you've learned about success in this industry?
Biotech isn't just about the science. Obviously, it's heavily based on the science. That's what we're all doing, is scientific excellence and application. But it's really about the execution. Anyone can have a good idea or a brilliant new breakthrough, but the best technology doesn't always win. We've seen that happen time and time again. And the companies ultimately that succeed are those that nail their business model early. And I think the biggest failure mode, companies that raise huge rounds but lack clear commercialization path, and they burn through cash very quickly. Unfortunately, it costs $2 billion and takes 15 years to commercialize a biotech therapeutic. And so burning through that cash quickly, but never building a sustainable business is a huge failure point. And I would say from an investor perspective, they care about obviously ROI and multiples and all the things, not just innovation. So you need a clear exit strategy. Start with the end in mind, whether through acquisition, IPO, or revenue growth.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about scalability every which way on cell and gene. And I'd like to hear from you, what do you think the biotech industry gets wrong when it comes to scaling companies from startup to market leader?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are focused on their next value inflection point or funding round, which in today's environment, it's very difficult not to be focused like that. But you really do need to keep in mind long-term sustainability. That includes manufacturing. We were on the front lines at CBM with manufacturing and scale up, and it is about having a scalable, repeatable GMP grade process and materials, analytical methods, and everything that go with it. So it's manufacturing, which includes everything I just said, market access, how you're going to go to market, where the patients are, how are they going to get treated, the payer strategy, how are you going to get reimbursed? All of that must be baked in from the start. And companies that succeed are those that solve the big elephant in the room in cell and gene therapy, which is the cost of goods issue and the reimbursement early. And lastly, I would say that private equity-backed biotech firms scale better typically than traditional C ones. PE investors tend to demand that operational efficiency and clear revenue model, whereas generally speaking, I hate to generalize, but I would say generally speaking and historically, VCs have been focused on endless rounds of capital raise. So it's nice to partner with a PE who really gets that commercial strategy.
Interesting. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about raising capital specifically. It's one of the biggest challenges that, for emerging cell and gene therapy companies, especially, who is a big part of our audience. So you've raised capital, built companies, advised leaders. If you were launching a cell and gene therapy startup today, what's the first thing you do differently from, how it's been done?
Yeah, I think you have to have the revenue model day one. Too many CGT companies are focused on the science and they assume, we'll get the science and, commercialization will work itself out. It will not work itself out. You really have to be strategic about commercialization efforts. That's the first thing. The second thing is partner early. It takes a village right now to commercialize a therapeutic, and big pharma is not the enemy. They're your best friend right now. They've got a lot of cash, and they're the ones who will fund or acquire the best positioned startups. The IPO market is very difficult right now, so partnership is the way to go. And by the way, you don't just need to sell, you can also license. There's some really interesting creative financing structures that we've seen lately with the IPO window being closed. And third, focus on scalability, not just approvals, right? I mean, many CGT companies get FDA approval, but then struggle post-approval with manufacturing reimbursement, making commercial success elusive. And candidly, just speaking on behalf of the market, we really do need to see some big commercial successes in CGT. It's been hard lately. So please focus on scalability and not just approval.
Yeah, good advice. So you mentioned just a minute ago about, VC-driven funding, and let's talk about that for a little bit. So biotech has relied on that exact model for decades.
Yeah.
Do you think it's sustainable, or, are we in here in biotech, things going to shake up soon for how it's funded and scaled?
Yeah, the old model is breaking down. The IPO window is tight. Venture firms are risk averse, and the days of easy Series A/B funding are over. So we're seeing the rise of alternative investors. Family offices are very interesting potential capital sources, corporate venture capital, and structured PE deals. Those are some of the new alternative sources of capital. And then biotech startups need to think about capital efficiency. As I said, you can't just rely on dilution-based funding. You need a strategy that blends equity, partnerships, and non-dilutive capital.
Okay.
So Grant, we all know that's a hot topic. That's a hot topic, and hopefully some of our lobbying efforts and advocacy efforts will go a long way, but it's tough right now.
Yeah, for sure. All that said, given where we are today, especially when it comes to, the small CGT biotechs, what are investors looking for in today's market, and what can these smaller companies do to position themselves for funding success?
Great question. I would say investors want as little risk with as much upside they can get, right? That's what they're focused on, the risk return profile and asymmetric returns in that nature. So investors want de-risked assets. They're funding companies that have clear cost of good reduction strategies. That's the first thing. The second thing, proven reimbursement pathways. How are you going to get paid for this? It might be the best therapeutic in the world, but if you can't get the insurance companies to pay for it, it's a problem. And third, we've seen the rise of scalable allogeneic or platform-based solutions. I know people think platform's a dirty word, but if you look at some of the interesting technologies that either gotten some big licensing deals or companies that have been acquired, it has been because of their tech that's related to the therapeutic, not necessarily the therapeutic itself. So last thing I'll say is it is definitely a buyer's market. So startups need to prove their differentiation and efficiency more than ever. And if you're an investor, I'd be running towards the things that folks are running away from. It's a good buying opportunity and investment time.
Good. Okay. Beyond financial returns, how do you, Audrey Greenberg, just, define a successful CGT company? And whether it be anecdotal or, specific metrics, patient access, affordability, sustainability, that type of thing. What do you believe investors and companies should focus on to bring more therapies to the patient, especially given how, patient focused you are?
Yeah. I mean, look, I got into this industry at a really interesting time. I had historically, most of my career, 25, 30 years, worked in finance and startups and venture capital, investment banking. I have a very different background. When we moved to Philadelphia 10 years ago, we had moved for my husband's job. At the time, I was working in the mortgage industry, of all things, in Denver. We had a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old. I was pregnant with my third. So I started doing some interim executive working. At the time, my oldest had one of her teachers had indicated she was having hearing issues, and we hadn't really noticed. And we took her in. It turned out she had a very slow growing tumor. And so anyway, we went through a bunch of surgeries at CHOP, and I became very familiar with the patient and family for the experience, especially at CHOP when they're treating patients from around the world. And you're sitting in that waiting room or watching your child get rolled away on a surgery bed. And there's times like that that change you forever.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was deciding at this career inflection point what I want to do with my life, it became very obvious to me. We were in the center of Philadelphia, cell and gene therapy hub. There was patient access issues. I became very, very motivated by getting therapies to market and reducing costs and on an international and global scale. So that's a very long answer to, beyond financial returns, what defines success. And the core of my drive is about access and affordability. So success isn't about just a great therapy, obviously. I mean, you can have a great solution, but you have to make it accessible, scalable, affordable. And if a therapy is priced at $3 million per patient and insurers aren't going to cover it, it's not a commercial success. So
Sure.
the best cell and gene therapy companies solve not just for therapeutic success, but also affordability, as well as efficacy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what a great story too. I'm so glad. And this is your son.
My oldest, yeah, my oldest daughter.
Yeah.
She's fine now. I mean, we have to monitor obviously for growth, but it is quite intense. This is, several surgeries. It is, and by the way, this was something that was not life, she wasn't going to die if she wasn't treated. I obviously it was very, not a good decision not to do the surgeries, but, I'm sitting there in the waiting room with families that are going through much bigger hardships than I was going through, and traveling from countries and cities, staying in hotels for months on end, away from their other children. I mean, the hardship on the families and the way that children and adults, for that matter, are treated with some of these breakthrough technologies, it's quite an experience.
Oh, absolutely. You think but you have no idea, right? Until you live through it. And I think CHOP is for sure one of those places where even every time I drive by, whether it's the Center City location, the King of Prussia location, I think I'm so glad it's here, but boy, I hope I never see the inside of that building. But thank you for sharing that story. That's incredible. I want to talk a little bit about the tech companies and the billions of dollars that they're pouring into AI-driven drug discovery. Another topic that we are covering more and more and more on Cell and Gene, and so whether it be Google or Amazon, do you think traditional biotech is keeping up, or are tech companies gonna, they're gonna belong to? Is the future of cell and gene therapy belonging to tech versus pharma?
I should love this subject. And by the way, we are so lucky to be in this time period. It is a fascinating time with data and all the omics that are working together to change patient outcomes with predictive algorithms that are going to know, are you going to have heart failure? Are you prone to this particular type of cancer? Should you be eating a Twinkie? There's some very interesting profiling that can be done that is going to increase longevity of our population. So to answer your question, though, I mean, this topic is very near and dear to my heart. I think, look, traditional pharma is very slow. They're incredibly slow, and AI and computational biology are accelerating R&D timelines from years to months. So there are just really incredible things happening in computational biology. And if pharma does not adjust to this and adapt, tech companies are going to eat their lunch. Mm-hmm. They just know how to move and execute. And I hate the expression move fast and break things, but that is sort of the Zuckerberg way. And I think that applies to many of the technology companies that just know how to take advantage of market opportunity and leverage data to effectuate positive outcomes and certainly revenue. The companies that don't merge biotech rigor with the tech speed, or the companies that do that, they merge the biotech rigor with the tech speed, will dominate the next decade. Mm-hmm. It's about leveraging this. So it directly answers your question. I think it's a combination, because the tech companies can't do it without the biotech knowledge.
For sure.
So some of these centers of excellence that hold a lot of patient data will have to work very closely with the tech companies that know how to leverage that data. And we'll see some very interesting partnerships that will provide benefit to all of us.
Yeah, good. Okay. I would remiss to not talk to you about leadership in biotech and even women in biotech. And so Uh, Pointing back to what you said earlier about kind of that executive gap that exists now, there is a major leadership gap in biotech, and we know scientists are being pushed into executive roles without the business training. And how do we fix it? Can it be fixed?
Not every scientist should be a CEO. We need to pair scientific visionaries with strong commercial operators. That is very obvious. Every headline we're reading now is evidence of that. Biotechs need structured leadership training. If you have a great scientific founder, it doesn't mean they can't be the CEO. They need to have great people around them that understand the rules of business success, the ones I talked about on this call, but also just training and development of how to manage people, how to communicate scientific information. How do you start with the end in mind? Not just and the end is not commercial approval, by the way. That is not the end. The end is having a blockbuster drug or being able to get patient access and reducing costs. So start with the end in mind. We need more structured leadership training. And investors, by the way, from an investor's perspective, should be looking for business first executives, not just brilliant scientists and researchers.
Yeah, fair. Women specifically are, of course, making significant contributions to the CGT biotech space.
Love it.
Driving innovation and leadership, investment, all the things. But we have some ways to go. So what are some of the things that we as an industry, we as, female leaders in the space, what do we need to do to help women continue to drive investment, close gender gap in leadership? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a top-down and bottom-up approach, and also just for facts and figures. I've done a lot of research on across industry because I've worked in so many different industries, from financial services to mortgage to mining, and retail, hospitality, real estate. I've been in biotech for about the past 10 years. And what I've noticed is at the entry level, there's a significant number of females and minorities. But as you get up to certainly the board level and the investor level, it's nearly that it's got to be 2% or less. And the board level, maybe it's 10% if you're lucky. And the cliff is just huge as you get up the ranks. So healthcare industry and cell and gene has an opportunity to really make a difference in that regard for women and minorities. And I would say the real issue isn't just leadership, because people invest in people that they feel familiar with, that share their similar backgrounds. It's about trust. And not saying that gender differences could potentially cause that, but what I'd say is we need more women on the cap table, but we need more women that are funding the cap table. So it's about capital control. I think from a top-down perspective, you need more women in the investment entities. 2% of biotech funding goes to female-led operations. And I do strongly believe if you have more females making those capital allocation decisions, more females will get funded. So that's sort of the top-down approach: more women in investors, more women on boards, more female executives. And then from the bottom up, you have to start at a very young age but I guess communicating to the masses that this is a great field to go in at the elementary and high school and even collegiate level, advocating for women in STEM. And then once women start, if we're greater than 50% female at the entry level, how do we get those females to stay? And it's about having policies, procedures, and supportive mechanisms, and females at the top that can serve as mentors to the young professionals that provide for a work environment that allows them to thrive. So it's a multi-pronged approach, but I would say capital control and institutional investors committing to tracking the gender gap and funding those companies.
Yeah, sure. And I would say even from a mentorship perspective, whether it be the young woman or, seeking that mentorship, or the mentor themselves, finding those women and asking them if they want to have, looking for a mentee. Yeah. It's a two-way street. I would strongly suggest to any of the young women listening, ask someone you think is doing it right, or, showing strong leadership, and ask for their help. And I can't imagine that there's a world in which someone would say, no, You know, I think that's a really important to advocate for yourself. Speaking of, you know, to the young women who are coming up in this space now, if you could go back and tell yourself your about career development and advancement, what would you go back and tell yourself, kind of knowing what you know now?
Yeah. Stop waiting to be qualified before making bold moves. That's
100%.
Yeah.
Do it. Yeah.
When I was in business school, I mean, I would see that men would apply for positions that they didn't meet any of the criteria, and women would review, well, I mean, I meet 9 out of 10, but should I still apply? Anyway, yes, stop, wait,
yes.
go
if you
for
meet
it.
6 out of the 10, apply.
Yeah, don't be shy. Okay. Right. Exactly. You can do it. You can do it. Second, network strategically, not just socially. So be very strategic about who you partner with, how you communicate with them, how you maintain that relationship, etc. And then own the room, you know, pull up a chair. Leadership is taken, not given. Don't just participate, drive the conversation, own the room. You have something that's worthy to be shared, and go about sharing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You have a voice, and use it and advocate for yourself.
Yes, exactly. And negotiate your salary up front.
Yes, also great advice.
Yeah.
Also great advice.
I could have a whole podcast on how to negotiate a job.
Don't think I didn't think about it, Audrey. Don't think I didn't think about saying, you know what, we're that's another podcast for, you know, down the road. All right. Well, but before we sign off, you've been deeply involved in supporting biotech innovation. If you can make one bold prediction that you have for the CGT industry that others might not be talking about yet.
Yeah. I don't know if I can stick to one, but I'll definitely go with AI is ultimately going to design the next generation of therapies. In 5 to 10 years, AI-driven drug discovery and development will outpace traditional R&D models. That's the first thing. Second, hopefully the cost of cell and gene therapy will either, one, drop dramatically, which I hope for, or the industry is going to collapse under its own pricing. We got to figure this out. And then third, tech and pharma, as we talked about, is going to merge. The biggest cell and gene therapy breakthrough in the next decade might not come from big pharma at all. It might come from Google or NVIDIA.
Right. For sure. Well, all right, listeners, that wraps up this milestone episode featuring Audrey Greenberg. Audrey, thank you so much for your time and your insight. This has been a really informative episode, just as I know it would be. Thank you for being here with me. This is great.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Erin.
Please visit us at cellandgene.com and tell your peers and colleagues to subscribe to Cell and Gene, the podcast. We will see you next time, and we'll talk to you soon.